Chapter 7. Thursday mid-afternoon. Doreen picked up the item and groaned. Nan, really? Nan was the sweetest woman alive, and Doreen hoped she was okay for money, but she kept putting things like this into Doreen's pocket, and instead of giving it to Doreen herself, Nan had put it in the veggie bag. It was, indeed, a roll of money. Doreen slipped off the elastic band around it and found $250. She stared at the bounty in front of her in amazement. Nan, I can live off of this for 3 weeks or more if I have to. She unrolled them and put them underneath a book to stretch the bills out. Then she picked up her purse and took a look. She still had over $400 in cash there, and she had just recently taken out the other $500 she'd been carrying in her purse and added it to the bowl of money. She wouldn't need much to get through a few months, but she didn't have any way of planning for the unknowns that could pop up. And to take all her cash on hand money, all $2,150 approximately, and put it into something like a deck seemed extravagant. And stupid. She was hoping maybe the books would have sold by now. She got $500 for a couple chairs Scott had sold for her, and she had that money too. Matter of fact, she brought out her laptop and checked her bank account. She was doing okay, but it depended on if they could get any more donations toward her deck edition. That was where the real trick would be. She really wanted that bigger deck. And she didn't want to wait until next year. As it was, June was upon them. Doreen wanted to enjoy her new deck edition this summer. However, she may have to just wait for the next one instead. She closed out of her bank account and searched for Kelowna tool repair. It took about 30 seconds, but none of the search hits were recent. The trouble was, there wasn't any website, although she did find a notice in an old newspaper article about how the physical shop was closing down. She sighed at that and realized it would mean a trip to the library to get more information. Apparently, the business had shut down almost 14 years ago. She wrote that down and then the name Frank Darbuncle. She laughed at that surname. Who goes through life with the name Darbuncle? But then that would mean it was the gardener's name too. Fred and Frank Darbuncle. She shook her head. I can't imagine. She found no mention of a sister. She would definitely have to make a trip to the library after all. But as she looked up, she noted her coffee had been sitting there, already brewed and waiting for her, and she'd gotten so involved in the Darbuncles that she'd missed pouring herself a cup while it was fresh and hot. She did so now and brought the 2 little pieces of metal back over and checked into how they'd been used, and why they'd been used. It took a bit of research, but she found it was a common practice for people who made tools to put a metal plate on them, usually with 2 nails to hold it in place, and that matched up with what she'd seen on these. She looked at various tools online, trying to figure out what the tool was she had on her back veranda. It was pretty dusty and covered in dirt, but underneath that layer, it seemed to be stained and rusted. Still, it was fascinating. It was heavy, too. She figured Mac would know, but maybe not. It was old and used. Speaking of used, she remembered she had another source of money potentially. She picked up the phone and phoned the consignment store. As soon as Wendy answered, she said, "Wendy, this is Doreen." "Hi, Doreen. How are you doing?" Wendy said in a bright, cheerful voice. "I'm doing fine. I was just wondering how we were doing for time and money." "Ah," Wendy said. "Most of your stuff is moving. Obviously not all of it because you did bring me a lot, and more was left recently too." "I know," Doreen said. "And I understand it hasn't been 90 days yet. I was just wondering if I could look forward to any money at that time." Wendy chuckled. "Last we talked, I told you how we already had several hundred in sales, but I can tell you that it's way more than that now. But of course, it's not all coming in 90 days though." Doreen tried to work her mind through that. "So, it's 90 days after the sale, is that correct?" "Yes. 90 days after the month ends that the sale was made in, she corrected. So that means I will pay you for the first pieces sold in, say, roughly 2 months or so. And then there'll be more every month after that. The first payment could be small, remember that. Perfect. I don't suppose, and then she let her voice trail away. How small was small? You want me to find out how much I owe you already? Sure. Would you mind? Doreen asked. I'd really appreciate it. No, let me take a look, Wendy said, silent for only a couple moments as she checked. You've done very well. I owe you over $2,000 to date. Doreen gasped in joy. Seriously? Yeah, seriously, but remember. You won't get it all at once. The first batch isn't bad though. There's over $600, but you won't receive it for another roughly 7 weeks. Fine, Doreen said, writing notes. That at least helps. I'll see the money coming then. Exactly, so you'll get your first payment in another 7 weeks and then another in 11 weeks, and then the balance in 15 weeks roughly. Of course, that's just on the clothes you have turned in so far that have sold. And payment is always at the end of the month. And you can come down on the last day, or the first day of the next month is better for me. Right, Doreen said, understanding. I suppose if I was early, you can just maybe take a moment and write a check for me? Wendy laughed. Possibly. Do you have any more clothes to bring down? I think there are some, Doreen said. I just haven't had a chance to go through it all. Considering that you're doing as well as you are, why don't you go through the rest of it, and then you'll hopefully get money continuously after your initial payment in 2 months for the following 3 or 4 months. Perfect, Doreen said after thanking Wendy, and she hung up. That would be possibly when I'll get money from Scott too. That'll be a big month for me. On that note, she went back out to the garage for some bags she had haphazardly put to the side to go to the charity. She loaded those into her car so she could drop them off on her next trip to town. But she still had stuff in her closets to sort, both in the master bedroom closet and maybe some undecideds in the spare bedroom closet. With a cup of coffee beside her, she decided she'd rather try on clothes and make more money reselling them than returning to work in her garden. So she slipped on and off the next 4 or 5 outfits and didn't like any of them. She tried on another couple. One shirt was fine and a pair of pants too, but the other items weren't for her. Several elegant dresses she had put off making a decision on, but they didn't feel right, not on the hanger and not on her body. Another load all ready for consignment, she packed it up in a bag, set it off to the side and dove through more clothes. By the time she was done for the day on this part of the project, she had another 9 pieces for herself and 15 to go to Wendy. She packed them up and decided that was enough. It was already after 4 in the afternoon. She took the 2 bags down and parked them in front of the car and then thought no, she'd better put them right in the car. She stuffed them in, grabbed her keys and mugs, and headed straight to Wendy's by way of Goodwill first. When she walked into the consignment store, Wendy laughed. I didn't mean you had to bring stuff down now, she said. Doreen shrugged. I figured I should go through some more stuff while I was thinking about it, so here's 2 more bags full. She handed them over, and Wendy sorted through them. They're beautiful, she said. Are you sure you want to part with them? I tried them on, Doreen said, and either they didn't fit properly or I didn't like the way they looked on me. Somebody else will love them. With that, Doreen smiled and headed toward the exit. She stopped and said, I don't remember how long you've been here. Do you remember a Kelowna tool repair? Wendy frowned. I think so, she said, but I can't remember for sure. I think my parents used to go there. Interesting, Doreen said. Is something wrong? Wendy asked, looking up at her. Another case to follow? Oh no. I just found some little metal plates from tool handles that got my interest. Oh, I've seen those. Yeah, he put them on his tools. Frank, wasn't it? Yep. Frank Darbuncle. Right, it's the last name that caught my interest, Doreen said with a smile. And they had a sister, didn't they? Frank and Fred, and yes, I can't remember the girl's name. That was? Wendy stared off into the distance. Lovely little girl. If you come up with a name, let me know. Henrietta, Wendy announced triumphantly as Doreen reached for the front door. Henrietta, okay, that's great. Do you know the parents' names? Wendy shook her head. No, I don't remember them. Perfect, thanks. With a wave of her fingers, Doreen led Muggs back out to her car. Knowing Mac would be arriving soon to cook dinner, teaching her how to do it herself, hopefully, she drove back home and got out just in time to see Mac pull up behind her. Where have you been? Mac asked lightly. Just delivering yet more clothing to Wendy's, she said. Plus a quick stop at Goodwill. Are you done yet? I am, and yet I'm not. I kept back a bunch. Remember? Thinking maybe I would want them for myself? Mac nodded. I remember that, and are you keeping those? I went through those and I'm keeping about 1/4 of the clothes, and the rest went to Wendy, who is doing a good job of selling them for me, by the way. You're doing well. Very well. So far I'll get a couple $1,000s from Wendy eventually. At that, Mac's eyebrows shot up. That almost pays for a deck. I know, Doreen said. It will be distributed piecemeal though, like the first bit coming in a couple months and a bit each month thereafter, until I'm all paid up. Then I'll probably go through all the clothes that are still here once again, before I can hopefully call it quits on that front. Mac led the way into the kitchen. I stopped at Mom's and she has 6 of those cinder blocks and no, she doesn't want them. I can work them off, Doreen offered. He shrugged. They're sitting in the garden shed, in the way. With 12 from a guy they first work with and 6 from my mom, we have 18. Plus I have 2 more. That's all 20, Doreen said triumphantly. She grabbed the notepad she had. We have 20 of them written down. Right. It works perfectly. Mac reached for the pen and put a big checkmark beside that entry. But we still have to get them. We do. It is better to have them all here. He looked around and then stepped out onto the small deck. Maybe we should stack materials alongside the house there, he said, motioning between her place and Richard's. That's a good idea. And if we fill that area, it should kill off the weeds too. Mac nodded. It won't hurt. And you've got a decent size overhang here, and with Richard's house right beside you, it'll keep these materials stashed there all pretty well dry from the weather. Doreen got really excited. How do we get the stuff from your friend though? I'll have to pick those up with my truck to get them all in one load, he said with a laugh. Your car could take a couple, but it won't take many at a time. As they walked back inside, Mac stopped, looked at the tool on her veranda table and asked, What are you doing with an ice pick?